Maximize cloud efficiency with Doit, the trusted partner in multi-cloud management for thousands of companies worldwide. Visit doit.com. That's DOIT.com. Do it, your cloud simplified.
Packet pushers.
Welcome to the Day 2 Cloud Podcast, you amazing humans. I'm Kyler Middleton, and with me is my amazing host, Ned Balavance. Today, we are talking to Jack Lindamood, infrastructure engineer at a company called Cresta, focused in the AI space, about all of the IT infrastructure choices that he has had to make over the past few years of leading their infrastructure shop. And there are a lot of them. Ned, what was one of your takeaways here?
That it wasn't just about tools, it was about process, and it was about humans and culture. And we got to explore all those different aspects of all those different things he's done at Cresta. It was riveting to me.
I totally agree. And we learned that tools are culture, which is fascinating. Well, speaking of that, let's get started and let's go talk to Jack. All right. Welcome, Jack, to our podcast at Day 2 Cloud. We found you online on LinkedIn, and you had a post about your leadership at the company you're at, which helped me out here, Cresta. Sounds interesting. Yes. But it was just incredibly broad about all of the stuff that you have decided and learned and picked up. And I have heard of some of those words, and some of them I haven't even heard of, and you have intelligent opinions about them. Thank you so much for coming here. We're very excited to talk to you about it. And I understand you haven't been on very many podcasts before.
No, it was my first podcast. And thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I want to be you when I grow up. I think I use that phrase a lot, but I do my best to be an expert at a couple things. And you come across as an expert at dozens of things. And I want to learn how to do that.
I would say I certainly have kind of gone deep into a lot of areas. I wouldn't really call myself an expert. I think I'm really good at learning things and picking up things and kind of knowing who the experts are so I can reach out to people and get advice. I think that's the only way you can really have so many things in your head at once.
Let's start at the beginning. Sort of the genesis of this post was your role at Cresta. So what was your original role there and how did it change over time?
Yeah. So I can even go back further, kind of talk a bit about why I picked Cresta and just kind of some thoughts on, what you should do if you're an engineer and you're trying to figure out what company you should work for.
Yeah.
If you're an engineer, maybe you're really good at software engineering, but you're not really good at sales or marketing or finance. So running a company is a lot of different things. It's not just engineering. There's dozens of parts that kind of make a company be successful. And one of the things I look for when I'm looking at a company is I look at who else believes in this company, which is especially really important for startups. You want to know who are the investors, who is the team on this company, who are their angels, who is the leadership at the company. So that was one of the first things that I looked at. I was okay, I want a company that other smart people really believe in. Another part of it is really look at the product and try to see if there's a product market fit. So Cresta does conversational AI. I could see the fit between how AI could help agents when they're trying to debug issues for customers or kind of keep customers on a platform. Another counterexample there, a lot of companies I looked at were blockchain specific companies. I understand why there should be one blockchain, but I don't really understand why we need 100. It was very hard for me to be okay, I get it. We need 101 blockchains. Your company makes sense to me. So, actually believe in the product, believe what it's selling, believe in the team. And if you have that core, then you kind of have the starter for a successful company. So that's kind of how I found Cresta. When I joined, we had one contractor working on infrastructure, and then I came in as the only kind of full-time hire. And it was up to me to build up all these pieces of what the infrastructure should be.
So your job was all the infrastructure. That's so broad. And was this just a tiny little company, and that's why you had so many hats?
Yeah, I would say we had just done the Series A. There were maybe a dozen to 15 people in the office. And then there were the kind of like people internationally, but the office itself was pretty small. Yeah, so I needed to like make quite a lot of decisions about, how are we going to do deployments? Do we even stay on Kubernetes or not? One thing that really helped me out here is kind of my network of people that I knew. So I'll give you an example. I didn't know if I should pick Flux or Argo for GitOps deployments. And I didn't really have a lot of experience with either. So I reached out to my network on LinkedIn. I was like, hey, you know Kubernetes pretty well. What do you think I should pick between these two? It's like, they're both pretty good, but I would probably go with Flux. And then that's kind of how I went with Flux. Another example was trying to do domain name registration inside Kubernetes. So I go into Google and I type domain name registration Kubernetes how or Kubernetes Reddit, right? And you read the post and you're like, okay, this person hates this person likes this person hates this. And then you kind of gather all that up and you make a decision. So I had to do that for a lot of things.
That's fascinating that you are talking primarily about the like social part. I thought you were going to say like, I spend 20 hours a day reading textbooks and blogs. No, it's more like knowing the right people to ask, knowing the experts in your network that can give you like the Cliff Notes version. And that's great. That's really cool. I didn't expect that.
I feel like engineers overemphasize the technical side of our role because we do very technical work. We write code, we work with computers. But the power of the social side of knowing who to talk to, knowing how to get the right information out, that's how you make yourself appear smarter than you actually are because you're leaning on the brains of a lot of people.
I think it's really interesting that you didn't go set up meetings with vendors either. You weren't like going out to CDW or Microsoft or a local ISV or something and being like, hey, can you help me with this or walk me through what are your thoughts here? Instead, you turned to Reddit and other social channels to get the experiences of other engineers and get their opinion on stuff. And I guess part of that's because a lot of these products are open source and free to use anyway. But I just think it's interesting that total shift from so many companies I was at. It was no, you ring up whoever your value added reseller is and ask them what the solution should be. And you're like, nah, I got this.
Yeah, I'm a little wary of people that want to make money off me. I will say, though, it's like online forums, Reddit, Hacker News, so on, they can tend negative. So I think there is advice there and there is knowledge, but you kind of have to develop this skill set of getting to the knowledge kind of through the weeds.
I've definitely seen that, a post that talks about what a garbage fire like zookeeper is going to get a lot more eyeballs than one that talks about a successful deployment with etcd and why I like it.
That's so funny. Like research is almost the opposite because you never get published for saying I tried this thing and it didn't work, but you're going to get published if you try this thing and it does work. And so research is just filled with all these like papers that people get published because they have this thing that actually works, but maybe it doesn't actually work because all the papers where it didn't work never got published. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, there's like a survivorship bias there. And then there's like the inverse bias for angry Reddit posts.
Yes.
Absolutely. Every time I Google something, that's all I find is that this doesn't work. This doesn't work. Oh, okay. Well, I got to do something. I have to make a choice. That's a good segue. So you started and you had 25 hats and they said, go figure out all the infrastructure choices for everything. And then how did that change over time? I imagine you had to hire some people eventually if you have 25 hats. That's too many roles for one person.
Yeah. So, the company grows. We tried to hire as the company grew. I will say, I feel like the best teams have just more work than people. Like if your work is the number X, I think you need enough people for X minus one work, not X plus one work, because that really forces you to kind of prioritize what you're going to work on and what's important. So I feel like I've tried to kind of keep the team size to a little bit less than the people we actually need to do what we're doing. And, it really helps you prioritize, I think.
And implement automation as well, I imagine.
Yes. Like I've never regretted automating something. I don't know. You think, it's just one-off thing. I'll just do it one-off. But that was actually part of, my process at Cresta was, okay, I'm doing this thing. I hit a wall. For example, they need to manually create domain name entries that point to our load balancer. I'm like, well, there's got to be a way to do this that's, not manual. So like I'll search for it and find one. I think another skill set that I've had to develop is kind of this gut feeling for when I know something already exists. So I didn't know that like secrets manager existed for Kubernetes. No one told me that. But I was like, this feels like a problem that other people would have. So it feels like a problem that there should be a solution to. And then really searching that out. That happens a lot. That's one of the advantages of the Kubernetes ecosystem is that so many people are coming into the same problems and solving them.
I have that same similar experience where I will make an inference and be able to find something that I've never seen before. And people say, like, how did you do that? And I think I explained to them, like, if I would have built this thing, that's where I would put it. Like, that's the thing that I would add. And that you'd be surprised how often that kind of logic works quite well.
Well, I want to frame up the post a little bit that started this whole conversation. We're going to put a link in the show notes, so we're not going to review the whole thing. It's a 19-minute read, which translates into roughly a 12-hour podcast. So definitely check it out. But basically, you walked through a series of technology decisions that you made over time and whether you endorse that decision today. And like I said, this is a 19-minute read, so you can just imagine the number of different technologies that you got some hands-on experience with, or at least understood to enough of a depth to make a decision and then endorse that decision later. How did you find time for all of that?
It's interesting because there's a list of things that I never even tried that's bigger than the list itself. A great example is picking cloud providers. So, I picked between GCP and AWS, right? Those were kind of the two we were evaluating. But I never evaluated Azure from Microsoft, for example. And you have to figure out where you're going to invest your time. And there's going to be so many things that you just don't have time to invest in. So with Azure, for example, I never really seriously considered it because of the reputation they have. So I personally have not had bad experiences with it because I personally haven't used it, but I know of their bad reputation. So I am not going to invest time in it. Funny enough, I think Microsoft gave our startup some credits to try their cloud. I think some of those credits just expired. So ironically, they couldn't pay us to use it.
But yeah, as someone who uses Azure on a regular basis, there are definitely some deficiencies that drive me a little bit crazy. I know before we started recording, I mentioned how eventual consistency is the devil, and it is. Comes back to bite me on a regular basis. Yeah, I'm just going to have to set up a 30-second timeout on this thing because if I try to query the thing I just created, it's like it doesn't exist.
And the API responses are not cap sensitive in the same way that the API inputs are, which makes me crazy. And before we go off on a tangent, we should pull it back because I will go ranting. Yeah, we're already ranting. So but this is just a natural follow-on. How do you choose where to spend your time, given that you had that huge list, things I want to try, things I want to try out? Correlated to that, how do you choose this is done? This is the right solution. We're going to stick with this one.
Yeah. So a lot of it was problem driven. So I don't think you should go in search of solutions. You should have a problem and then try to solve it. So we would have problems where I need to deploy a thing. This is a problem. Okay, let's find a solution to it. I have a problem of we have secrets in Kubernetes. How do I keep them synced? Let's find a solution to it. All of the things that I did were just started at the problem and then kind of worked from there. And then you also have to kind of weed out things you're not going to try. For another great example would be load balancers. So we've stuck with Nginx. There's a lot of interesting load balancers out there for Kubernetes, and we never really tried any of them. And it wasn't because I don't endorse them or because I don't think they're good products. Nginx just worked really well. And we never had a problem using it. I mean, we've had problems, but never that made us kind of switch to something else. So we just stuck with it.
I like the way that you phrase that. You don't go in search of a solution before you have a problem. You should at least be trying to solve a problem, whether it's a technical problem or a business problem, and then find the solution that solves that problem. There is a danger there of getting into tool sprawl, because if you're only selecting a solution every time a problem crops up, then you're going to have 100 different solutions, as shown by the length of your blog post. Do you worry about tool sprawl, or do you feel like at some point you might consolidate tool sets?
I wouldn't mind consolidating if it kind of made sense. One thing I've invested really heavily on is documentation. So I wish I could show our internal Notion doc, but it dozens of articles about how we've configured things, how things work, so that other people, when they have problems or concerns, they can look at the documentation, kind of answer it themselves. And that really helps kind of take the stress off the team and makes having a lot of tools scale better, because we're not constantly like answering, oh, how do you set up a deployment that deploys on ARM? Oh, well, there's a documentation for that. So the documentation part helps. And as far as like the number of tools, I think it really depends on its quality, not quantity. So like you could have a post that says, I use a service mesh. And then you could have a post that says, I use Cert Manager and I use Secrets Manager and I use Carpenter. But those three tools are not as complex as one tool, a service mesh. And it's not really about the number of tools. It's about the complexity of each of those tools, I think, individually.
Right. Taking that Linux philosophy of do one thing very well.
Yes.
And I like that framing of complexity sprawl versus tool sprawl. And I totally agree. As much as I can, I frame it in like, I want to limit the number of languages that the people who work on my infrastructure have to know. But really, that's just another way to say what you said is limit the complexity of what you can as much as you can.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting on that language part. One product we were using early on is Hasura, which it's kind of like an automatic GraphQL layer for a database. So you can kind of feed it GraphQL and get database queries back. And we would run into problems using it. And then I would say, okay, let's look at the source code. And the source code's in Haskell. And like no one really knew enough to go deep into it. And it legitimately became an impediment to using this product because we couldn't quite understand how to use the code itself, how to understand it.
Totally. Became a business risk, or at least an infrastructure risk. Interesting.
One of the things that you endorsed in your post, and you just mentioned it briefly, was Notion. I'm curious, that's not necessarily a technology tool in the sense that, you're not deploying infrastructure with it. You're not building applications, but you listed it in your grab bag of tools. Why was Notion in there amongst all these other tool sets?
I think the tools you use matter a lot. One example, like Slack. Slack solves our problem really well. It's a really core communication piece to our company. And the tools can kind of shape how you do communication. So we had a lot of people coming from Google, and they would bias towards email as a more means of communication. Maybe that's because of like the size of the company or because of the tooling internally, but they came here and, we use Slack. And if you use Slack correctly, like, thread things and stuff like that, it's a very rapid kind of iterative tool that changes the culture of the company. So the tools kind of influence that. And with Notion, I had used wiki-ish tools in the past. I think Notion has a really innovative approach to this like database concept with pages that's made it really easy to do like recurring meetings or pages that are very similar to each other, like incident reports. And you absolutely have to invest real time keeping it up to date. Like that, just you absolutely do. But the knowledge transfer that it was able to easily give us, it was way better than all the other wiki-ish tools I've used in the past.
Yeah, the biggest thing for me, especially with documentation, is to limit the amount of friction required for someone to document their knowledge. If you make it really complicated with these weird forms and you have to install this special application or something along those lines, they're never going to do it. But if you're just jot down your thoughts on this page and maybe we'll clean it up later. I mean, at least you're getting that first like brain dump of info, and then you can sift through it later and make it something a little more formal if you need to.
For sure. And like another example there, originally we had people coming over from Google. They would put their documentation in Google Docs. So like architecture designs and things like that. But one of the things I don't like about Google Docs that I do like about Notion is public by default. And I think defaults matter. So when you document things in Google Docs, they get kind of like lost in this sea that's of privacy, honestly. And in Notion, at least it's like discoverable, it's public, people can see it. I'm a big fan of like openness in a company. And openness it's like a tag word that everyone uses. Oh, we're open. Oh, we're open. But you have to be very intentional about it. Another example would be maybe I'm on Slack and someone starts a 5-person DM of, hey, we want to do this new technology. Would we be able to install this in our clusters? And I will say like, no, make this public. Like, let's make a public thread. Let's move this public. Let's have the conversation there.
I see. So yeah, being intentional about there are other stakeholders that need to be involved in this. And also you might want to document that decision-making process for later. So when someone's like, why did we do that? You can actually point to and go, this is why, because Jack said so. And it's Jack. So that's what we have to do.
It's not even the stakeholders. It's like just this culture of, I don't want someone feeling left out. I don't want someone feeling like their input is invalid or that they couldn't contribute to something if they wanted to. Another example would be a team was considering using Kafka. And they were having this internal conversation about, oh, let's use Kafka. How should we set this up? How should we do that up? And then later, someone else discovered this. And that person said to me, I'm a Kafka expert. Why didn't I know this existed? I supported like a Kafka cluster for like a year. Like, I should be in this conversation. I should like say something. I should have input. And I'm like, you're right. You should. That conversation should not be private. That conversation should be public so that I can link you to it, so you can discover it, so that you can be part of it. So it's also like the feelings of being excluded, which is an important part. I think maybe this is a tangent, but I feel like engineers, we're still people. People have feelings, and we tend to kind of hide that a bit inside the corporate structure. And that can, lead to like negative parts of a culture.
Maximize cloud efficiency with Do It, the trusted partner in multi-cloud management for thousands of companies worldwide. Do It's innovative tools, expert insights, and smart technology make optimization simple. Elevate your cloud strategy and simplify your cloud spend. Visit doit.com. That's DOIT.com. Do It. Your cloud simplified.
I love that. I totally agree. And I love the conflating of like tools are culture. They influence one another. They become one another. So if you can have tools that support openness and egalitarian like discussions that are open, your culture can become that and feed that. I love that. That's great.
Light bulbs are going off in my head, Kyler, right now, because the way that you phrase that, both of you, it's just like tools are culture. The way that a tool is set up, the defaults that it has out of the box, the amount of process or the stumbling blocks to start using it all informs how well I can do my job and how well we can interact with each other. And that forms the bedrock of the culture as well. So, wow. Okay. So this stuff is kind of important.
Yeah, I think it is.
Hence the very long and awesome post that you put together. You referenced so many tools in there, and some of which I was familiar with. There's a lot of Terraform stuff in there. Thumbs up to Terraform, big fan. But there was stuff I'd never heard of before. So I'm curious, since you've had a chance to kind of evaluate all these tools with your team, what are some ones that we might not have heard of? Or what are some tools that you think are growing in popularity that people should know about?
Yeah, I know this is going to sound buzzwordy, and I didn't call it out directly, but I think AI is going to absolutely change how we write software, just completely. I really do, like in my core. I have to believe that I work at an AI company. I would be, but no, I really do. I think AI is going to change everything. So yeah, I think that how we write code, AI is going to be like a tool. I don't think it's going to replace people yet. So I think that fear is a little bit far-fetched. I think AI is going to change a lot of how we write code. It's going to be a tool. A great example would be like a search engine. So search engines are a tool, and how to use one correctly is a skill. Like knowing the phrase you need to type, like, should you type GitHub on the end of this query because it's about code? Or should you type this other thing? Because should you quote these parts to find the answer you want? The internet has a lot of information, and using a search engine correctly to get that information is kind of a tool and a skill. And I think AI, how to use AI, how to frame it, and how you write code and how it makes you a better programmer is going to be a skill. I've seen people do things where they just dump a problem into AI and they watch AI solve it poorly. And then they say, look, AI is terrible. It can't solve this problem. I just dumped it in and it didn't work. But like that's not how you use a tool. Like that, you don't like drop a knife on a sushi board and say, oh, I got sushi. Like, no, there's a skill to using the tool. You have to know, all right, I'm going to break it down into these pieces. I'm going to ask for like these direct inputs. It's going to give me ideas on this and kind of help me out. So I would put AI out there.
So I love that metaphor of the sushi knife and just dropping it on like the cutting board that already has like some fish on it and be like, yeah, it'll make sushi for me. And if you've ever watched someone who is truly skilled with a knife, you realize what an amazing tool that is with someone who's been properly trained and has developed the skill. And I feel like I haven't had a chance to really observe other people using AI. And I'm sure there are those power users out there that have figured out sort of the prompt engineering side of things. And they're reaching that level of skill like a true sushi master might. And that is only going to become more prevalent in the future as AI changes and grows. So a great metaphor. I love it, Jack.
And I think it's notable that's also not how you would work with a human person. You wouldn't say, go build an app, make it buy stuff. Like you need so much more guidance. And that's what you have to provide to these sort of human-like interfaces that AI provide. You need to provide details or it will solve the problem in the wrong way, in a way you don't expect, just like an engineer would without any guidance.
It's almost like we have this whole feedback loop thing. Isn't that like a core principle, if I'm remembering correctly?
I almost feel like eventually someone could do a course on how to use AI to code better. I can give examples. So I use GitHub Copilot, and when I'm writing a unit test, I might need specific inputs, and I'll write a comment that says, now I have input for a square next to another square. And then it'll auto-generate the data points for like two squares next to each other, and I can pass that into my functions. Like ways, or example, if you have it writing code and it's doing a really poor job with figuring out the right way to do it, then I'll name a variable the solution to the first triangle equals, and it'll get me that right. And then I'll say like the solution to the second triangle equals, and it'll give me that part right. And then it'll understand, oh, I have to take these two solutions and make a thing out of it. So just kind of how you write the code and how you will change, I think, is a skill.
Yeah, I do something very similar. I use GitHub Copilot as well, and I tend to start stuff with a comment if I think it might be able to produce a block of code that makes sense, and I just kind of type in the comment what I want to be in that block of code, and then it gets it like 90% of the way there, and then I have to massage it, but like that's 90% of the code that I didn't need to write. And when I think about that being deployed at large scale, where the grunt work, that 70% or 80%, we'll use the Pareto principle, right? 80-20 rule. 80% of the code that you write now can be written through a comment. And then the other 20% is the actual value add of customizing it, cleaning up the issues, making it more streamlined. But how much time did I just save myself by not having to type that? Like IntelliSense was amazing. And this is just like IntelliSense times 10.
Absolutely. And we're so at the early phases. I mean, you got to think about like the first cell phones, those big blocks. Like, I don't know if you saw the movie Speed. The guy has this like 30-pound cell phone that he's like calling someone on. That's where we're at. Like, we're at that. And in 10 years, this is going to be a big changer.
Going to be the iPhone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I went to a talk on AI recently, and they pitched it as like, this is the internet in 1998, and some people are going to get hacked, and it's going to go down, and things are going to break. But that doesn't mean stop using the internet. It's going to change the world. It just needs some time to get there. And I like to think about it that way.
I like that.
It's definitely going to break the internet, though.
Yeah.
Well, Jack, you spoke briefly about in your post how no application team vertically owns their database and infrastructure, or at least when no application team owns their database and infrastructure, it all becomes owned by DevOps, which is like your team. And you called that out as a negative. I feel like some platform teams would be like, no, that's how we want it. So why do you think of that as a negative?
I think incentives matter in software. So who has the incentive to do this well? And I'll give you an example. Some companies will separate who writes tests and who writes software. And I don't like that because the incentives don't align. You should be incentivized to write software that's testable. And you should be incentivized to not write buggy code. So if an issue happens, like, where's the incentive? The incentive is they will ping me and they will say, hey, Jack, you need to please fix this code. This thing broke. Or, hey, Jack, we changed a downstream dependency and now your code broke and no one knew. So I need the incentive to write testable code, to write good test. And I think that also plays into the database part. Developers kind of need an incentive to use a database properly. And when you have this separation of, okay, I'm going to own the database and someone else is going to own the code, I've seen it. Their query will be slow and they'll add another index. And that query will slow and they'll add another index. And that query is slow and they add another index. And you end up with a database of like 50 indexes because it was like, oh, I'm just going to add another index. And it's this slow creep of just slowness. Like, no, I want that team to feel a little bit of the hurt of having an improperly used database. I would see infrastructure, like my role and the company, as I will make it easy for you to spin up databases. I will make it easy for you to do schema migrations. I'll make it easy for you to monitor your database. Like, I'll set up this framework where you can do what you want to do very well, but I still want you to have the incentive of using the database correctly.
I like that. And I think that's a problem that we've seen a lot with the like application developer split with DevOps that runs it. Because then they just, you toss code over the fence and you say, good luck running it. Let me know how it goes. And I like that, trying to follow that lead of ownership all the way to delivering value and delivering, uptime value. I think that's great. I think that's a good development of that split.
Absolutely.
Given the breadth of what we brought you on here for, this was bound to be like a tangential conversation, but I think it's been really interesting and useful, even though it's been so broad and sometimes shallow, but occasionally like very deep. And seeing how it all ties together is interesting to me.
We mentioned like technical tools and then like cultural tools, or just like tools that help you interact. But one thing we haven't talked about is process. And in your document of things that you mentioned processes specifically, which is like not even really a tool, though you can use tools with your process. What were the two big processes that jumped out in the document that you wanted to mention?
I'll bring it back a bit. Our job as engineers is to solve problems. It's not particularly to write code. And so create a process only if it's going to solve a problem. And one of the early problems I saw was this kind of creeping cloud bill and this creeping cost. And I feel like every company, literally every company with any type of bill or finances at all, needs at least a monthly meeting where you go over cost. And in the past, that had been done mainly with like a finance focus. So we had the VP of finance. He or she would go over our cloud bill and try to break it up into cost of goods sold or not, and then kind of move on with their life. It's really hard for someone with a finance background to have the context of knowing our cloud bill for this went up 50%. Does that make sense? Like, is there a gut check there? We've found examples of people left a queue on and they just forgot about it and the bill went up, or they were experimenting with a new GPU model and they had this like 8 GPU system or whatever just running for days. It's like, no, we got to like shut that down quick. You can make generally alerts on this, but I feel like just having a human look at the cloud bill was really important. So I asked the head of finance, I said, I want you to look at our monthly like bank statement. I want you to find the biggest numbers on that bank statement that are like cloud spends. And we're going to go over those. So, we went over Datadog and GitHub and AWS and any of our clouds and Google Workspaces, all of it. Just kind of just gut check it. I think that one was really important. And I'd strongly recommend it. And there's another one. So another one I'll talk about was going over PagerDuty alerts on some kind of cadence. I could write a post about this, but the way I broke up PagerDuty alerts at the company, there are wake me up now, it's nighttime and I absolutely need to know. And then there's this thing broke, but I'll figure it out tomorrow morning or whatever. It's not like super important. Mm-hmm. So we kind of have this like high, low priority kind of dichotomy. And every 2 weeks, we will go over all the PagerDuty alerts as much as we can fit into a meeting and say, all right, this was a high priority. Is it really high priority? Like, let's actually think about it. Oh, it was or it wasn't. Let's tweak this thing. And then we kind of like bucket through our low priority alerts and say, oh, these had like a similar problem, so let's like upgrade this driver. Or, oh, these had a similar problem, let's tweak the thresholds because they're not really that alerty. And like those two cadences, I think we had both every 2 week PagerDuty alerts and the cost tracking. I could see every company having something similar.
In my experience, the answer to like the priority of things is always to escalate. Like, no, my problem is the biggest problem, and so it's now a AA problem. Okay, well, we need a higher priority. So now we're going to introduce AAA priority. And then, somebody has to one up that. So they're like exclamation point quad A priority or whatever. It's like, I like that you took a moment to review the prioritization of your alerts and maybe, downgrade some of them. Go, yeah, you don't need to get out of bed for that. And I'm sure the people who are on call, thank you,
Yeah, based on the human impact and the human requirement that those alerts trigger. I was recently part of an alert process that was 3 a.m. and it was a dev server shut off and I can't turn it back on. And we woke up the whole team and we were like, oh, I guess this shouldn't have been a P1. So it's just, yeah, for a developer, when their dev server's down, it's a P1. But for the product, for the people, is it actually? I think that's relevant.
Yeah, a big one. I mean, when we started up PagerDuty, like at first there were like no alerts in the company. No one knew until like a customer told us. So like, all right, let's make a bunch of alerts. And then it's like people are waking up at night. It really sucks to wake up at night. It's just really draining, man. So we really go over those. And we're like, do I really want to be waking up at night for this? I think, yeah.
In our shared notes, you have one line here, and it speaks to my soul. It's the power of saying no. It's something I constantly struggle with. And I want you to expand on A, what do you mean when you say the power of saying no? And B, how do you do it?
Yes. When you're a team that's smaller than the stuff you have to do, you have to say no. And I think that ICs and developers have more power than they think they do. I think they believe the power resides with the managers, but I think the power actually resides with the ICs. Maybe this is a philosophical debate about like democracy or not, but I think the ICs have more power than they think. And you have to be able to say no, or at least say what the consequences of saying yes are going to be to someone. Like you have to get that clear. So if someone asks you to do something, so one example was someone was like, hey, we need a service mesh. Like, I just absolutely need a service mesh. Otherwise, my product doesn't work. And I was like, whoa, like that's a big commitment on me. Let's go into your problem. Let's figure it out. Oh, you didn't need a service mesh. You just needed like this timeout thing here or something. And it kind of like worked around it. And I didn't need to like develop a service mesh. There are so many things at the company that I've said no to that we've like found a different way to kind of get around. And I feel like a lot of teams are biased to saying yes to everything. And then you get your head underwater and you can't get back up. So I feel like being able to say no and have this trust. People use this word trust when they talk about teams and like what it means. But trust is kind of this two-way street you're supposed to have with your manager, where if your manager asks you to do something and you can say no, they trust you that, yes, this person's smart. They said no for a reason. So I should listen to that. I say no a lot, but you still have to solve a problem, but you have to say no. You just will have too much work.
Okay, excellent. So next time I need to tell someone no, I'm just going to call you. and be like, all right, so I'm going to put Jack on the line and he's got something to tell you.
This is where maybe the impact of like having a good manager really comes into play. A good manager should be able to say no for you, should be able to navigate this, like should be able to understand what you're saying to them about, hey, you don't have enough time to do this, or be able to say, okay, I'll say yes to this, but look, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that, you don't have to do that, we're going to make room for it. Maybe it's like the curmudgeon-ness of DevOps engineers in general, but I think they underestimate the value of like a good manager and how that can help you save time.
Absolutely. This discussion has been so fun, but we're going to try and wrap it up so we fit within our time slot. So if people want to continue the discussion with you and find you and read this article we talked about and read your future stuff, where can they find you?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. They can also find me on my personal website, cep.dev. I love chatting with people, so just reach out to say hi.
That sounds great.
Well, Jack, thank you so much for being a guest today on Day 2 Cloud. It was an excellent conversation. And hey, listeners out there, virtual high fives to you for tuning in. If you have suggestions for future shows, if you have guests that are almost as awesome as Jack was, let us know. You can reach out to us via LinkedIn, or we have a contact form on packetpushers.net/FU. The FU is for follow-up. Get your mind out of the gutter. You can find me, Ned Bellavance, at nedinthecloud.com, and my amazing co-host, Kyler Middleton, blogging over on Medium. And we're both active on LinkedIn. Stop by, say, hey, what's up? If you're a cloud vendor or someone who makes a tool that wants to sell it to other people, why don't you share that tool with our audience of IT professionals? You could become a Day 2 Cloud sponsor. You'll reach several thousand listeners, all of whom have problems to solve. Maybe your product fixes their problem. We'll never know unless you tell them about it on our show. Find out more at packetpushers.net/sponsorship. Until next time, just remember, cloud is what happens while IT is making other plans.